Elijah Jones, at 28, considered his small patch of suburban green not just a yard, but an extension of himself. Newly settled into the quiet cul-de-sac, a carpenter by trade, Elijah poured the same meticulous care into his lawn as he did into his handcrafted furniture. Weekends were sacred, dedicated to the rhythmic push and pull of the old rotary mower he'd inherited, a comforting ritual of sweat and the sharp, clean scent of freshly cut grass. But progress beckoned, and Elijah, after months of saving, had finally invested in a gleaming cherry-red riding mower from the local hardware store. It felt like a grown-up indulgence, a symbol of his burgeoning independence, a promise of summer afternoons freed for other pursuits. The morning he wrestled the behemoth from its cardboard cage, a giddy thrill bubbled inside him, the same excitement he remembered from childhood Christmases. He devoured the instruction manual, each page a step closer to mastery. He carefully measured oil, poured in gasoline, and even buffed the glossy paint with a soft cloth until it shone under the late morning sun. Sinking into the molded seat for the first time, hands gripping the cool, textured steering wheel, a wide grin stretched across his face. This is it, he thought, a quiet hum of anticipation vibrating in his chest. No more backaches, just smooth, effortless green. His reverie was shattered by a slam. Not a door closing gently, but a violent, resonating thud that vibrated through the still summer air. From next door, Beatrice Lancaster, a woman whose age seemed to shift with her moods but consistently hovered somewhere in the unsettling territory of late middle age, emerged onto her manicured lawn. Beatrice was a study in contrasts. Designer sunglasses perched atop a head of aggressively blonde hair, a floral sundress that strained against her frame, and an air of perpetual offense clinging to her like cheap perfume. She was a neighborhood fixture, notorious for her petty grievances and a simmering resentment that seemed to target anyone who dared to exist within her perceived sphere of influence. Whispers circulated about past disputes, about complaints lodged against families for everything from leaf blowers to the color of their front doors, always framed with a delicate, victimized whine that masked a core of steel-edged entitlement. As Elijah engaged the mower, the engine coughed to life, settling into a steady, low rumble. It was a pleasant sound, the mechanical heartbeat of suburban industry, no louder than a passing truck. But within moments, Beatrice's front door flew open with the force of a thrown fist. Her face, normally carefully composed in a mask of suburban politeness, was contorted in a mask of raw, incandescent rage. A vein throbbed visibly in her temple. Heels clicking with sharp, angry staccato against the paved walkway, she marched across the invisible property line, trespassing onto Elijah's freshly seeded lawn. She planted herself directly in the path of the advancing mower, a fleshy roadblock of floral cotton and simmering fury. Elijah's foot slammed down on the brake pedal, the sudden stop throwing him forward against the steering wheel. The engine sputtered and died. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice a high-pitched whine that grated on the nerves, laced with a venomous disdain that felt personally targeted. Elijah cut the engine completely, the sudden silence amplifying the pounding of his own heart. He removed his noise-canceling headphones, the peaceful hum of the summer afternoon now tainted with the shrill edge of Beatrice's anger. "I'm mowing my lawn, ma'am," he replied, his voice calm, deliberately even, though a knot of apprehension tightened in his stomach. He could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline in his mouth. Beatrice folded her arms across her chest, her gaze, magnified by her oversized sunglasses, boring into him like twin lasers. "Do you have any idea how obnoxious that contraption is?" she hissed, each word carefully enunciated, dripping with condescension. "The noise is simply barbaric. It's rattling my windows, giving me a migraine. Frankly, it's completely inconsiderate." Her nostrils flared, and a faint tremor ran through her body, whether from genuine agitation or performative outrage, Elijah couldn't tell. Elijah took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of cut grass doing little to soothe his rising unease. "Ma'am, it's midday. It's Saturday. It's lawn mowing time. I'm just trying to take care of my property. I'm not breaking any noise ordinances." He gestured to the mower, a harmless machine rendered menacing by her irrational fury. Beatrice's laugh was sharp, brittle, devoid of humor. "Ordinances?" she scoffed. "This is about common decency, young man. Something you clearly know nothing about. If you don't turn that thing off right now, I am calling the police. And I will be filing a formal complaint with the HOA. Her eyes narrowed to slits behind the dark lenses. "I'll have you know I have connections." Elijah blinked, momentarily stunned by the sheer absurdity of the situation. "Call the police? For mowing my lawn?" It was ludicrous, Yet the chilling certainty in her voice sent a shiver of unease down his spine. "You're really going to call the cops about this?" he asked, incredulity coloring his tone. Beatrice's lips curled into a thin, triumphant smile, a predatory gleam flickering in her eyes. "Oh yes," she purred, reaching into her oversized handbag with a deliberate flourish. "I most certainly am." She produced her phone, a sleek, expensive device that seemed incongruous with her escalating hysteria. Her fingers stabbed at the screen, her voice rising another octave as she barked into the receiver. "Yes, police? I need to report a disturbance. My neighbor, yes, the new one, is intentionally creating an unbearable noise nuisance with some sort of industrial lawn machine. He's refusing to stop. I feel threatened." Yes, threatened and deeply distressed. Elijah's jaw tightened. He watched, a cold knot forming in the pit of his stomach as she spun a web of blatant lies, her voice laced with faux victimhood. He couldn't believe the audacity, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement. "You're calling 911 over this?" he repeated, his voice now edged with a disbelief that bordered on anger. Beatrice snapped her phone shut with a satisfied click. "You'll see," she sneered, her voice dripping with smug self-assurance. "You'll see what happens when you try to disrupt the peace in my neighborhood." She emphasized the word "my" with an almost territorial possessiveness. Elijah shook his head, a weary resignation settling over him. Reason was futile. He switched off the mower completely, the sudden silence heavy and pregnant with unspoken tension. He would wait for the police, confident in his innocence, yet a prickle of unease remained. This wasn't just about noise. It was about something deeper, something colder, radiating from Beatrice like a palpable chill. As he stood there, the weight of the situation pressed down on him. It wasn't just about mowing the lawn. It was about something else, something unspoken, something that resonated in the subtle shift in Beatrice's gaze, the barely perceptible curl of her lip. He caught a fleeting, dismissive glance, a flicker of something ugly in her eyes that had nothing to do with lawnmowers and everything to do with the color of his skin, the texture of his hair, the very fact of his presence in her neighborhood. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a cold, sickening understanding of the true nature of her hostility. The police cruiser arrived with a silent flash of blue and red, its presence a stark intrusion into the quiet suburban street. Two officers emerged, their expressions carefully neutral, their movements deliberate and measured. Beatrice, seizing her moment, launched into her rehearsed performance the instant they stepped onto the pavement. Her voice trembled, her hands fluttered dramatically to her chest. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed, her voice a theatrical sob. This person has been terrorizing me with that monstrous machine. He's disturbing the peace, endangering my health. I demand you arrest him immediately." The officers turned their attention to Elijah, their gaze assessing, professional. "Sir," one of them said, his tone calm and even, "can you tell us what's going on here?" His eyes were open, non-judgmental, offering a sliver of hope in the suffocating cloud of Beatrice's manufactured drama. Elijah nodded, keeping his voice steady, his gaze direct. "Officers, I was simply mowing my lawn. It's a new mower, I just bought it. First time using it, actually. I started around noon, figured it was a reasonable time. I genuinely didn't realize I was causing any trouble." He gestured to the silent mower, parked innocently on his lawn. "It's the middle of the afternoon. I'm just maintaining my property." The officer glanced back at Beatrice, who was still radiating indignation, her face a mask of righteous fury. "Ma'am," he said, his tone shifting subtly, becoming just a fraction sharper, "is there anything else you'd like to add?" Beatrice huffed, her cheeks flushing a mottled red. "He's lying. He's been doing this for hours. Hours, I tell you. And he's refusing to stop. I can't take it anymore. The noise, the vibrations, it's unbearable." The officers exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. One of them walked over to the mower, circling it slowly, examining it with a practiced eye. He ran a hand along the seat, peered at the engine, then straightened up. "This is a standard residential riding mower, ma'am," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. "It's well within acceptable noise levels. And it's perfectly legal to operate during daylight hours." Beatrice's eyes widened, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling around her. But, he's disturbing me. Doesn't that count for anything?" Her voice wavered, the certainty faltering, replaced by a flicker of panic. The second officer shook his head, his expression unwavering. "Ma'am, operating a lawn mower during the day is not a crime. If the noise is bothersome, you might consider closing your windows. Or perhaps investing in earplugs? His tone was polite but firm, leaving no room for further argument. Beatrice's mouth opened and closed, soundless, like a fish gasping for air. She sputtered, then fell silent, her outrage momentarily deflated by the cold, hard wall of reality. The officers turned back to Elijah. "You're free to finish up, sir. Just try to be mindful of the time, okay?" Elijah nodded, relief washing over him in a warm wave. "Thank you, officers. I appreciate it. I will." As the police cruiser pulled away, Beatrice's carefully constructed facade shattered completely. Her frustration erupted, boiling over into a torrent of unfiltered rage. She spun on Elijah, her face twisted into a grotesque caricature of fury. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she spat, her voice thick with venom. You people, you think you can just move in here and do whatever you want? You're nothing but trash. You're beneath me. If you ever mow this lawn again, you'll regret the day you ever set foot in this neighborhood." The word neighborhood was laced with a possessive, exclusionary malice. Elijah stared at her, the full force of her racism hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The casual cruelty, the dehumanizing venom in her words, left him momentarily speechless. He didn't respond, realizing with a weary certainty that any attempt at dialogue would be futile, would only fuel her hateful fire. Instead, he climbed back onto the mower, his hands trembling slightly, and restarted the engine. The familiar rumble, once a sound of promise, now vibrated with a different kind of resonance, a defiant hum against the ugliness of prejudice. He finished mowing his lawn, each pass a small act of resistance, a quiet assertion of his right to exist, to belong, to simply care for his own patch of earth. Later that evening, the lingering chill of the encounter still clung to him. Beatrice's words echoed in his mind, a toxic whisper that threatened to poison the quiet satisfaction he usually felt after a day's work in the yard. The injustice of it burned within him. He had done nothing wrong, yet he was made to feel like a criminal, an unwelcome intruder, simply because of the color of his skin. The casual, ingrained racism of her threats left him feeling shaken, vulnerable, exposed. Driven by a need to understand, to protect himself, Elijah found himself online, searching Beatrice Lancaster's name. He sifted through public records, local news archives, digging into the digital detritus of her past. What he unearthed sent a fresh wave of cold dread washing over him. Beatrice Lancaster had a history. A history that wasn't just about petty neighborhood squabbles and inflated complaints. A history that involved something far darker, far more disturbing. He found articles detailing charges, court records, inappropriate behavior with minors, certified predator, sentenced, served time. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. He scrolled through the details, the clinical language of the reports painting a chilling picture of calculated manipulation and predatory behavior. The woman who had just hurled racist insults at him, who had falsely accused him to the police, was not just a neighborhood nuisance. She was dangerous. A genuine threat. He printed out copies of everything, the news articles, the court documents, compiling them into a thick folder. If Beatrice escalated, if she tried anything else, he would be ready. He would have the truth on his side. Beyond the practical preparations, Elijah knew he needed to brace himself emotionally. He knew with a chilling certainty that this wouldn't be the end of it. Beatrice wouldn't back down. She would likely retaliate. He spent the rest of the evening practicing calm breathing exercises, mentally rehearsing how to stay composed, how to respond with measured words, how to stand his ground without succumbing to anger or fear. He reminded himself again and again that he had done nothing wrong. He had every right to be here, to maintain his home, to live his life in peace. Sitting at his kitchen table, the folder of documents heavy in his hands, a new feeling began to solidify within him, resolve. He wouldn't be intimidated. He wouldn't be bullied. He wouldn't let Beatrice Lancaster dictate his life, his peace, his sense of belonging. The next time she confronted him, he would be ready. Not with anger, not with aggression, but with the unwavering power of truth. The following weekend dawned bright and clear, the air thick with summer humidity. Elijah woke with a sense of quiet determination. He would finish what he'd started. He knew Beatrice would likely appear, a storm cloud on his sunny Saturday morning. But this time he was prepared. As he wheeled the cherry-red mower out of the garage and fired up the engine, he kept a watchful eye on Beatrice's house. He wasn't surprised when within minutes her front door slammed open, and she emerged, a figure of tightly wound fury, stalking across her lawn and onto his. "I told you not to mow this lawn again," she shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing, cutting through the hum of the engine. Elijah cut the power, the blades whirring to a stop. He removed his ear protection, meeting her rage with a calm, steady gaze. "I'm just taking care of my yard, Beatrice," he said, his voice even, controlled. "I have every right to do that." Beatrice's eyes narrowed, her face contorting with a fresh wave of venom. She pointed a trembling finger at him, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You're not just mowing the lawn. You're a drug dealer. A menace to this neighborhood. You're endangering us all. I'm calling the police and this time they'll arrest you. I swear it." Before Elijah could respond, before he could even process the ludicrousness of her new accusation, Beatrice was already dialing 911, her voice shrill and demanding. Elijah shook his head, a weary sigh escaping his lips. The escalation was predictable, yet still somehow shocking in its brazenness. He reached into the mower's small storage compartment, his fingers brushing against the reassuring weight of the folder. He pulled it out, holding it calmly in his hand as they waited for the inevitable arrival of the police. Beatrice continued her tirade, her accusations growing increasingly wild and incoherent, her voice cracking with manufactured outrage. When the police cruiser finally pulled up, sirens silent this time, Beatrice rushed towards the officers, a whirlwind of fabricated distress. "Thank goodness you're here," she cried, her voice a frantic plea. "This man. He's a drug dealer. He's threatening me. You have to arrest him. Right now." The officers turned to Elijah, their expressions now carrying a hint of something beyond neutrality, a flicker of weariness, perhaps even suspicion directed at Beatrice herself. "Officers," Elijah said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through Beatrice's hysteria, "I'd like to show you something." He extended the folder towards them. "This woman has a history of making false accusations. She's a convicted predator. She has a criminal record for inappropriate behavior with minors. I believe she's trying to harass me because I stood up to her last week." Beatrice's face drained of color, her carefully constructed mask of victimhood dissolving into raw panic. "That's not true," she shrieked, lunging towards Elijah, her fingers clawing at the air in a desperate attempt to snatch the folder. "He's lying. He's trying to ruin my life." The officers stepped swiftly between them, their expressions hardening as they opened the folder and began to review the documents. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice now firm, authoritative, "these documents appear to be legitimate." He glanced up at Beatrice, his gaze unwavering. "You need to calm down and stop making false accusations." Beatrice's hysteria reached a fever pitch. She realized, with dawning horror, that her lies were unraveling, that her carefully cultivated image of victimhood was crumbling before her eyes. "You can't believe him," she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "He's a liar. A criminal. He's." The officers, now fully aware of the true nature of Beatrice's character, issued her a stern warning. "Ma'am, making false accusations is a crime. If you continue this behavior, you could face charges yourself." But Beatrice was beyond reasoning. In a final desperate act of rage, she lunged at Elijah, her hands clawing at the air, her eyes wild with fury. The officers reacted instantly, swiftly tackling her to the ground, handcuffing her with practiced efficiency. "You're under arrest," one of them stated, his voice cold and official, "for assault and making false reports." "No. You can't do this to me." Beatrice screamed, tears streaming down her face, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. "I'm the victim here. He's the one who should be arrested." A ripple of applause broke out from the small crowd of neighbors who had gathered to witness the unfolding drama. "Good riddance," someone shouted. "We've been waiting for this day." Elijah watched as the police cruiser drove away, Beatrice's fading screams echoing in the summer air. A profound sense of relief washed over him, a feeling of quiet justice finally served. He climbed back onto his mower and finished cutting the grass, the hum of the engine now a soothing sound, a soundtrack to his newfound peace. Later that evening, Elijah found himself surrounded by his neighbors, an impromptu celebration spilling out onto the cul-de-sac. Laughter filled the air, stories of Beatrice's past transgressions traded like celebratory toasts. Gratitude hung heavy in the warm evening air, a shared sense of liberation from a long, oppressive shadow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across his neatly mowed lawn, Elijah stood in his driveway, a quiet sense of pride swelling in his chest. He had stood up to injustice, not with anger or aggression, but with dignity, with intelligence, with the unwavering power of truth. Beatrice Lancaster's reign of terror was finally over. The neighborhood could finally breathe easy. The sound of laughter, genuine and unburdened, echoed through the streets, a joyful symphony celebrating a new chapter for their community.